Soft morning light filtered through the tall pines surrounding the rustic cabin, painting delicate shadows across the writer's retreat. A poet named Tomas arrived at the retreat just after dawn, his mind teeming with half finished lines and images hungrily seeking form. He had come with a stack of blank notebooks and a promise to himself. During these weeks, he would explore the intricacies of the human heart through verse. The retreat was renowned for its serene environment, no internet, spotty telephone reception, and more deer and wild birds than people. Isolated from the daily grind, writers could immerse themselves in their crafts without distraction. Tomas, though usually excited at the prospect of solitude, found himself nursing a kind of loneliness. The tranquility he had sought all these months now felt strangely suffocating, as if the concentration of silence were too much to bear. But he was determined. Restless nights and half scribbled stanzas had followed him since he first decided to come, and he wanted nothing more than to find the right words, to overflow his empty pages with refined anguish and hope. Each step he took from the cabin to the modest dining hall echoed with possibility. He passed other writers, some short story authors, others essayists, and a few novelists, but recognized no faces. They too were in their own worlds. Greetings were brief, respectful nods or murmured hellos, as though conversation itself might disturb the creative hush. At breakfast, Tomas picked at his oatmeal without much appetite. He found that the small talk around him was primarily about books and craft, though occasionally drifting to hushed confessions of how they'd all come to the retreat for a fresh start, or to wrestle with personal ghosts. He overheard someone mention a crocheter who sometimes wandered into the dining hall, but the conversation was abrupt, as though the crocheter or weaver was a benign rumor more than an actual presence. Tomas almost ignored it. He was used to bits of local color surrounding remote retreats and meeting grounds, but something about the mention stayed with him. He ended up seated near a window. Outside, dew kissed the grass, and sunlight glinted off the glassy surface of a small lake. The hush in the dining hall felt like a shared vow. No one wanted to disturb the fragile enchantment of beginnings. Tomas tried to focus on the swirling lines of morning, to gather images he could set onto a page later. He replayed the lines in his head, but words struggled to flow. Whenever he put his pen to his notebook, he found himself worrying that he would force the lines and ruin a perfectly good idea before it had a chance to bloom. By the time the sun rose higher, he had only a single verse to show for his effort. In the hush of sunrise, the unseen awakens. Late that afternoon, Tomas decided to hike along a winding path leading into the woods. The bracken underfoot gave off a pleasant, earthy scent as he wandered. The retreat's guidelines suggested minimal intrusion into the wilderness, so the paths were narrow and the signage, while sufficient for safe navigation, was subtle. Birds whistled overhead, and a gentle breeze rustled the branches. With every step, Tomas felt he was approaching the heart of something immense, something intangible he badly needed to capture with words. Suddenly, the path opened into a small clearing. Standing in that patch of openness was a person wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and a long, light shawl that fluttered in the wind. Tomas slowed, uncertain whether to pass by quietly or say something. The figure seemed absorbed in the canopy overhead. After a few moments, they turned around, revealing a face alight with kindness. It was difficult to guess their age, but the softness in their expression was instantly comforting. "Are you looking for something?" the person asked gently. Their voice had a lyrical quality. Tomas shook his head. "Not exactly, just wandering and thinking of poetry." They smiled, folding the shawl around their shoulders. "Words can take you far, they say." With a slight tilt of the head, they studied him. "It's nice to meet another soul seeking inspiration." On impulse, Tomas introduced himself. "I'm here for the retreat. I've been wrestling with my poems, trying to capture, well, not quite sure yet. Are you a writer too?" They offered a subtle smile. "I'm more of an observer and perhaps a translator of sorts. I'm Corin. There was something enigmatic yet warm about Corin. As they fell into step together, weaving back along the path, Tomas discovered an unexpected sense of ease. Corin seemed genuinely curious about Tomas's work and asked soft questions that prompted him to share more about his poetic struggles without feeling self-conscious. By the time they parted ways near dusk, it was as though the emptiness Tomas had been wrestling with was filled with a quiet energy he couldn't quite name. Over the next few days, Tomas scoured his mind and heart. He wrote a modest poem each evening, capturing the hush of dawn, the whispers of the pines, or the calm presence of a heron by the lakeshore. A gentle pattern formed. After lunch or dinner, Tomas would wander the grounds, sometimes passing by the clearing, where he might catch sight of Corin in the distance. Occasionally, Corin would wave, and they'd share a moment's conversation. Other times, Tomas would catch the subtle rustle of cloth. He deduced Corin might be weaving or embroidering. The fleeting glimpses intrigued him, leaving him with a sense of something magical unfolding just beyond his line of sight. Finally, near the end of the first week, Tomas worked up the courage to ask Corin directly about their craft. They met by the lakeshore, where the mirror-like surface reflected the pine trees. Corin sat on a large, flat stone, a basket of colored threads and yarn at their side. "I've been seeing you, or hearing rumors about you, working with cloth," Tomas began. "I'm curious, may I see what you're making?" Corin's bright eyes flicked toward the basket. "Of course, I'd be honored." They motioned for him to sit. When he did, Corin brought out a length of fabric that shimmered in the waning light. Threads of various colors, gold, teal, purple, and russet, twined around one another in a tapestry that seemed to portray nature's subtlety. There were vague shapes reminiscent of pines and a pattern that evoked ripples on a lake's surface. "I like to gather impressions of this place, then bring them together in cloth form. It's beautiful," Tomas said, meaning it. The tapestry was mesmerizing, each stitch purposeful, forming a pattern that felt at once simple and profound. After a pause, Corin turned toward him. "Have you been able to write any poems?" Tomas felt a sudden rush of self-consciousness. "A few, mostly short, incomplete. This place is rich with images, but somehow letting my emotions flow isn't always straightforward." "I know how that can be," Corin said softly. "Creative work often reveals the deeper tides within us. Perhaps it helps to think of each line or stitch not as an endpoint, but as a stepping stone to something greater." Their voice lowered, growing thoughtful. "Would you share a piece of your poetry with me?" Tomas hesitated. Sharing a fledgling poem always made him feel exposed. Yet, as he looked into Corin's gentle expression, he sensed genuine respect and curiosity, not judgment. He opened his notebook to one of his shorter poems, a collage of images describing early morning mist over the lake. His voice trembled a little at first, but soon the poem flowed from him. Mist drapes the lake like a secret repurposed for the dawn. Somewhere, a single heron echoes the hush, longing to rise. He finished reading and found that Corin's eyes glimmered, focused more on him than on the page. "That's lovely," Corin murmured. A hush seemed to settle between them, quiet but not empty. In the days that followed, a surprising new ritual took shape. Tomas would bring Corin new or revised verses, and Corin would sit with him, listening carefully, occasionally posing subtle questions about the images, the emotions behind them, or the experiences that sparked them. Corin never offered criticism in the typical literary sense. Instead, they seemed more attuned to the imagery's flow, the underlying emotional tapestry. And then, as if guided by a muse beyond words, Corin would pick up needle and thread and weave a small section of cloth, a swirl of color, an interplay of shapes capturing the soul of the poem in fabric. As Tomas watched these tapestries grow under Corin's skilled fingers, he felt deeply moved. The concept of weaving words into cloth was something he had never encountered. Each stitch carried an essence of the poem in a language that transcended letters. Talking about the poems while witnessing them transformed was an unexpected form of romance, a communion of expression that needed no explanation. He began to wait eagerly for each meeting, cherishing the gentle humility in Corin's eyes when he handed over another draft. In turn, Corin gifted small squares of tapestry that reflected the poem's essence. The squares varied in color and pattern, sometimes swirling with bright threads, other times subdued, echoing the hush of a wistful line. Soon Tomas had a growing collection of these woven interpretations, each a tangible reflection of his art. As their connection deepened, they fell into easy conversation about personal histories. Tomas shared how he had left his city apartment behind after a painful breakup. His ex-partner had found his poetic obsession and lingering nights at the desk troublesome, seeing them as a barrier to practical life. Corinne listened with compassion but didn't pry. Instead, they offered that they had been drawn to weaving by an elderly mentor who believed that cloth carried the stories of the weaver's hands as much as the patterns. Tapestries have a silent language, Corinne said, a conversation between texture, color, and story. One evening, near the midpoint of the retreat, they decided to walk the perimeter of the lake at sunset. Clouds glowed in soft pink and orange hues, and the water gleamed like liquid garnet under the gentle conversation drifted toward heavier, more vulnerable topics. Tomas hesitated, then confessed something he rarely told anyone but his closest friends. My poems often come from a place of longing, he admitted. I haven't always known how to let people in. The words are safer for me. They become a shield, like I can connect without truly being seen. Corin paused, gazing out at the twilight horizon. Perhaps weaving is like that for me. Thread by thread, I try to say the things I can't articulate in conversation. A delicate sigh escaped. Romance, vulnerability, acceptance, they are all patterns in the tapestry, stitches forming something that can't quite be spoken aloud. Their eyes met. In those few seconds, it felt as though the entire world had grown still. Tomas could hear his heart beating, could sense a fragile hope taking shape in that quiet. He reached for Corin's hand, guided by an impulse to close the space between them. Corin's fingers trembled slightly as they laced them with his, a silent acknowledgement of the connection forming between them. The next day, Tomas found himself writing with an almost feverish devotion. Each poem poured out with an honesty he'd rarely allowed before. He wrote about the ache of solitude, the tender hush of possibility, and the courage it took to share that which lay deepest in his heart. Freed from the burden of self-censorship, he ventured into raw territory, permitting himself to be transparent on the page. A new poem, unlike any he'd composed, emerged. Your hand in mine, gentle as the threads you weave. In that hush, possibilities bloom like sunrise kissing the world awake. Later that evening, Tomas read the poem to Corin by the fire pit outside the main lodge. The flickering flames illuminated the tension in his cheeks, the hesitant quiver in his tone. When he finished, silence lingered. Corin didn't speak right away, but instead gently touched Tomas's cheek, as if searching for any sign of retreat. Then they slid their arms around Tomas, a gesture of affirmation that left both with misty eyes. The next day, Corin presented him with a tapestry square glowing in sunrise colors, pale gold, pink, and a faint suggestion of dawn's purple. The pattern swirled gently, reminiscent of woven clouds parting for the sun's first rays. Quietly, Corin said, I wove this after hearing your poem. I'm still capturing the words, but it felt right to share it now. Tomas realized then that their artistic bond had become more. Each poem was weaving itself not only into cloth, but also into a shared sense of trust. The retreat setting with its minimal distractions magnified this closeness. The growing tenderness between them was like a secret garden they were both watering with each whispered line and carefully placed stitch. Yet for all the magic blossoming between them, a lingering question hovered in Tomas's heart. What would happen when the retreat concluded? Corin did not seem eager to talk about life outside this wooded enclave, nor did they mention a permanent address or future plans. Tomas could not imagine returning to the city with all its noise and stress without Corin by his side. But he also recognized the precarious nature of short lived retreat romances. Time moved strangely in these secluded worlds, often distorting feelings and commitments. He tried to gather the courage to ask about the future, but found himself hesitating. Each time he opened his mouth to say something, Corin's bright eyes would catch his, and the question would fade. Instead, they would sit together, watch the wind stir the branches, or read and stitch by candlelight in companionable silence. Perhaps this unspoken question gave their bond a heightened poignancy, the knowledge that each day was precious, that they could not remain in this sanctuary forever. As the final week of the retreat dawned, the organizers started making announcements, reminders about the closing dinner, instructions for clearing out cabins, and gentle prompts to finalize any writing. Tomas felt a swirl of emotions. His poems had taken on new dimensions, reflecting both the euphoria of new love and the creeping sadness of looming goodbyes. Late one night, after the moon had risen high over the lake, he poured all of that tension into a long poem, several pages describing the heartbreak of departure, the desperate need to hold on to a moment, and the delicate promise that love, if sincere, endures beyond physical distance. He spent hours refining and revising it, tears occasionally welling at the corners of his eyes. Dawn approached, and he finally shut his notebook, taking a long, steady breath. This poem was the most vulnerable piece he had ever penned. He hoped that Corin, upon hearing it, would offer an equally vulnerable response. Sleep eluded him, so he watched the sunrise, brimming with anticipation. That afternoon, he found Corin in the clearing where they had first met. The tall pines stood sentry around them, and birdsong threaded the quiet air. Ending any small talk, Tomas opened his notebook and read his poem in a gentle yet trembling voice. It spoke of how love can feel both fleeting and eternal, how illusions fade, leaving only an aching truth that either strengthens or breaks the heart. Corin listened with tears shining in their eyes. When Tomas finished, a hush descended on the clearing. That was truly something, Corin murmured, voice catching. Such honesty. Thank you for sharing it. Though grateful for the kind words, Tomas' chest tightened at the realization that the poem's question, "Will you stay or do we part forever?" remained unspoken. He gently took Corin's hand and asked the question that wouldn't let him rest. "What happens next, Corin? Where do we go from here? I don't want us to be separated by more than distance." Corin's eyes glistened. They looked away briefly, as if seeking some invisible source of courage among the pines. Then they spoke slowly. "I've spent years drifting, letting my weaving lead me. I've never stayed in one place long enough to root. But these weeks, and you, have awakened a need in me I can't ignore. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that walking away from this, without exploring its potential, would be the deepest regret of my life." A breath Tomas hadn't known he was holding escaped, replaced by a tremulous smile. He thought to say something bold, perhaps a promise that they could figure it out, live together or travel. But Corin spoke first, voice tinged with hope. "Could we see what a shared tapestry looks like?" They took from their basket a long length of plain linen. "I'm thinking, each day we add a new stitch. If we're near or even far away, we could mail it back and forth, each sewing some new pattern into it, letting our bond and our art converge across the fabric." Tomas's eyes narrowed, tears of relief and joy threading their way. "Yes," he breathed. "We can let this tapestry become our story, day by day." They both laughed, trembling with excitement. In that moment, the final piece fell into place. A newfound confidence anchored Tomas's heart. This love did not need all of life's answers right away. They had the promise of continued creation, a weaving of words and threads that would keep them connected, building layer upon layer of shared understanding. On the final day of the retreat, everyone gathered for an informal celebration, a chance to share their work and socialize after weeks of quiet devotion. The dining hall was bustling with friendly chatter, a soft piano melody in the background. Warm plates of food occupied tables draped in cloth, and the scents of roasted vegetables and sweet rolls filled the air. Some writers read excerpts, while others offered thanks to the group. Tomas volunteered to read one last poem. Standing with Corin by his side, he inhaled, gazed at the attentive faces, and felt a rush of certainty. He began reading softly, lines that spoke of the first moment he had glimpsed Corin in the clearing. Each stanza recalled the magic of their newfound romance, the quiet synergy of creativity shaping a relationship neither had anticipated. The room listened in respectful hush, though a few shared smiles surfaced, sensing the love in his words. When he concluded, Corin lifted the tapestry they had been working on, unveiling it for the retreat's participants. The shimmering threads depicted watery reflections, pine silhouettes, and subtle representations of poet and weaver, drawn together by strings of color, forming a single shared horizon. At the tapestry's center, a wave of applause rose, gentle but heartfelt. Tomas felt a glow as he looked at Corin, who returned his gaze with gratitude shining in their eyes. In that moment, it no longer mattered how many people they faced or how many miles might separate them after the retreat. They had discovered an intimate way of merging their crafts and hearts, one that transcended the physical world. Near or far, the tapestry would continue growing, carrying new lines of poetry, new stitches of thread, new declarations of affection. Early the next morning, the retreat came to a solemn close. People packed their belongings, returning keys and offering goodbyes. Muddy footprints were tracked through the pine needles as cars slowly left the compound. Tomas loaded his bag into his small sedan, pausing for a final glance at the cabin. That quiet stoop where he had wrestled with creative doubts seemed oddly comforting now, as though reminding him of how far he'd come. Then his eyes fell upon Corin standing nearby with a small suitcase. Their hands carefully clutched the shared tapestry project in progress. Corin approached, offering a gentle embrace. "Ready to go?" Tomas closed his eyes in that warm circle of arms. He felt a new sense of belonging, no longer a solitary poet retreating from the world. "Yes," he whispered. "Let's see where our weaving takes us." The two walked to the car together, the tapestry folded neatly in Corin's lap once they settled inside. As they left the pines behind, an unspoken promise lingered in the quiet hum of the engine. Each new day was another line of verse, another stitch in the grand tapestry they would continue to craft together.